So welcome to Lumen Musings. Why is it Lumen Musings? It's because it's things about church planting that I get asked a lot. Whether or not they're good or bad, these are some of the main ideas behind that. One of the big questions that happens too is why plant by starting a small group of people versus a normal thing. So we're kind of, our ambitions of planting churches is kind of backwards from what's normal. And maybe it's good, maybe it's bad. Normally when churches are planted, a bunch of money is gathered with usually a professional planter, and they're sent to kind of parachute into an area. And a lot of the momentum goes towards building up a core team that really highlights and actually having a Sunday morning service. And so your Sunday morning service is a central piece. But often you gather a bunch of people together, and then you don't have a healthy family to invite them to be a part of it. So you now have a gathered group of people, and there's really question maybe over the health of the family. So we're trying to do it backwards. And incidentally, we think it can be done with a lot more, with a greater economy of things. By going to a town and seeing, taking advantage of 100 years in America of really good books and radio ministry and internet and television. And there's been a lot of people getting a lot of good teaching, even in towns where there aren't churches like that. So can we tie into that, those people there, and touch base with them and find that quite possibly we have quite mature people who don't really have churches that reflect their heart and their theology. And so since we as a church function in like these decentralized groups where men and women of all ages are all together functioning as God's family, could we use our normal training to find potential leaders for those out in these towns through a rather prayerful, long process of getting to know them and casting a vision for what we want to invite them into, since a lot of them haven't really seen this type of body life before. So can we actually find those folks and gather them together in what we call Missional Community? You can call them different things like small groups, cell groups, home churches, different things like that. But largely, it'd be part of our church under one pastoral team, but they would function largely as a group of God's family, and it should reflect God's family. It should be the old and the young and the male and the female, adults and children. And so since that's what we do in our church, it kind of makes sense that we could do it from a distance, but we need to figure out really prayerfully and carefully who those right people are, and if God really is leading them to us and us to them, and if they're in a local church, that really their church would support that and how their pastors would feel. So we're trying to start a church in kind of a backwards manner by starting a group, and then those groups would eventually multiply and become enough that it actually become a church. And it would be measured not so much on having a Sunday morning service, though we aim to have that. It'd be measured upon us ultimately having an independent group of plural elders there. So we'd be shooting for trying to find the right 2 or 3 men who would be elders of that church. At that point, let it release, and they could change the name and do whatever. But they would be independent at that point in time. So that's a long game. That's not fast. That might take 2 or 6 years. It might never even work, but that's the trajectory we want to go, because we really want to establish really healthy, strong churches that are focused on God's word, that see themselves and function vibrantly as God's family, and therefore steward that message on mission in that rural hub and in the rural areas around it. So it's a different method. It's kind of planting backwards what almost everyone else does. But I think the hope is that we could do that and really give it really strong bones from the beginning, really where it would be a strong family of God. But of course, not everyone's going to be in for that, because a lot of people want a nice Sunday morning service, and that will come later, Lord willing, as we go along. So that's the method. It's kind of backwards. And then bonus, if we do this right, though it is slower and hopefully better, it may be a lot more economical too. Instead of gathering multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars to fund a planter or planting team to parachute into a town, and then they have to gather people really quickly before that money runs out, we could probably do it by simply diverting some of our staff time using the tools that we already have as a decentralized church to build these. So there it is. There is the planting churches through a missional community type model, and why we want to do it that way, and why we're willing to take extra time to do that. And yeah, hope that makes sense.